Howdy folks, hope you all had a good weekend, and welcome back once again to Monday and Mingles with Jingles. I thought I'd get started this week by doing something that I really don't do often enough and answer some of your questions, so I headed over to the Salt Mines Discord server, where all you little salt miners obviously have far too much free time, because you've posed a metric arse ton of questions for me. So I'm not going to waste any time, and I'm pretty much just going to get straight into them. The first question comes from Pilot B, and he says, Jingles, are there any games on the horizon that you're looking forward to? Not really, no. The two games that I was probably looking forward to more than anything else were Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which was good. I am enjoying playing it, although I haven't touched it since Cyberpunk 2077 came out, but I will get back to it and finish it. My only real problem with Assassin's Creed Valhalla is that it just wasn't as good as Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But being not quite as good as Assassin's Creed Odyssey is no bad thing. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is good, it just felt like a little bit of a letdown after the sheer amazingness that was Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And then of course the other big game that I was looking forward to was Cyberpunk 2077, and that didn't exactly have a flawless launch. Although I have very much enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077. I've sunk more than 320 hours into that game, if my Steam stats are to be believed. Played through it 4 times. Seen, I think, all of the possible endings. And while each time I played through it I did continue to see new things, I've pretty much exhausted all of the Cyberpunk possibilities at the moment, and I'm just kicking my heels, wasting time waiting for some DLC to become available. As for games that I haven't actually played yet, that are due out this year, there's very little that I'm actually getting excited about. I mean, they're remaking all of the old classics, aren't they? Mass Effect's getting a do-over. I heard they were going to be remaking the Knights of the Old Republic. Yeah. How about a game I haven't actually played? Werewolf the Apocalypse. I'm actually getting moderately, I don't want to say excited, but at least interested in that. For those of you who don't know what Werewolf the Apocalypse was, is anybody old enough to remember Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines? You might have heard that they're doing a Vampire 2, which is also due out this year. Well, Werewolf the Apocalypse was a tabletop role-playing game published by White Wolf, the same people that did the Vampire game, set in the same universe, but with werewolves instead of vampires. And they set the werewolves up as a kind of hippie guardian of nature type deal. So I'm interested at least in seeing what the computer game version of that is like, although it could so very, very easily go horribly, horribly wrong, but they at least have my interest. And then of course you've got Vampire Bloodlines 2, the long-awaited sequel to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, a game that was so ridiculously bugged on release it made Cyberpunk 2077 look like a finished product. But after a couple of years the community patched the game into a pretty playable state, and it was absolutely incredible. Still to this day one of the best games I have ever played. Again, cautiously optimistic about a sequel. Just because you attach a popular name to your product doesn't guarantee any kind of quality, so I guess we just have to wait and see. I'm also, and I hate myself for admitting to this, but I am kind of looking forward to Far Cry 6 as well, because the Far Cry series, well, they've never really pushed the boundaries of gameplay, but you know exactly what you're getting with a Far Cry game. The character that you play will be infinitely forgettable, with most of the colour from the game coming from the antagonists rather than the protagonist yourself. Because the Far Cry games have, going all the way back to Far Cry 3, had great antagonists, starting with Vas Montenegro, Pagan Min in Far Cry 4, Joseph Seed in Far Cry 5, and they're set to do it all again in Far Cry 6 with Giancarlo Esposito hired to play the villain. And I've been a fan of this guy ever since I first saw him in 1991 in the Don Johnson and Mickey Rourke movie, Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. Of course, he's vastly more famous these days for playing Gus Fring in Breaking Bad and Moff Gideon in The Mandalorian, so I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do in Far Cry 6. Actually, I've just realised something. Because I said that you know what you get in a Far Cry game. A completely forgettable protagonist. You know, the person that you play as the main character. And yet it's the opposite in the Assassin's Creed games. Like in a Far Cry game, the most interesting characters are the bad guys, the antagonists. But in an Assassin's Creed game, the bad guys are mostly pretty forgettable. But the main character, the protagonist, is the best character, like Cassandra in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Eivor in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Although the fact that Eivor is the most interesting character in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is more a indication of just how completely forgettable the villains are as well. And here's another thing that I'm noticing about Ubisoft open world games. And this is actually something that occurred to me quite a few years ago, but I don't seem to be able to help myself. And this really does seem to apply, at least in my experience, to every one of these Ubisoft games that's set in an open world, whether that be The Division, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, whatever. They're the kind of game where I can lose hours just sitting there playing, because there's always something else to do. There's always something different to do. Not something that's particularly interesting or engaging, but different. I'm never doing the same thing over and over and over for longer than 15 or 20 minutes at a time. So I can very easily find that an entire day has gone by and I've been sitting in front of whatever Ubisoft game it is that I happen to be playing before I eventually stop. And then the next day I'll fire up the PC and I'll sit down in front of The Division 2 or Watch Dogs Legion or whatever it was I was playing the day before for hours and hours and hours, and I'll just think, nah, I'm not feeling it. There's no compulsion to get back in and keep playing. Completely different experience to other games that I've enjoyed and invested an equal amount of time into, like Cyberpunk or the Mass Effect games, where each day I'd get up and I couldn't wait to play more just to see what happened and where the story went and what happened to the characters. Playing a Ubisoft open world game, it suddenly occurred to me as I was sitting on the toilet having a really big shit. Really. This is where the thought occurred to me, because I was thinking about this. Playing a Ubisoft open world game is a lot like when you're in high school during the summer holidays and you've been given a load of homework to do for when you go back to school. And you put it off and you put it off and you put it off, because who wants to be doing homework during the school holidays? Until you've only got a couple of days left and you realise you haven't done any of that homework. So, much against your better judgment, you sit down and start. And, well, this was at least my experience. Yours may have been different. But I found that once I started doing the homework, I would power through it. I would go on for hours and hours and hours. A lot like playing The Division 2 or Watch Dogs Legion or any number of Ubisoft open world games. And then at the end of a several hour long homework session I would realise, wow, it's getting late, I should get some sleep. And then upon waking up the next morning I'd look at the pile of undone homework and just think, nah. While at the same time knowing that if I could just start, if I could just motivate myself to make the start on that unfinished pile of homework, I'd be ploughing through it for hours and hours and hours, and before I knew it, it'd be time to go to bed again. In exactly the same way that I experienced the gameplay loop of Ubisoft's open world games. It's not exactly that they're unenjoyable, but, well, I wouldn't exactly say I was enjoying myself while I'm playing something like The Division 2 either. I'm just keeping myself occupied. There are certainly some of these open world games where they do have strong characters and decent storylines where I do feel as if I'm enjoying myself. I think Far Cry 5 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, in my experience at least, are the two best examples. Yeah, Ghost Recon Wildlands was pretty good in that respect too. But there are an awful lot of these Ubisoft games where it just feels like you're playing filler. So the news that Electronic Arts had lost the exclusive license to produce Star Wars games, which I mentioned last week, and that Ubisoft were developing an open-world Star Wars game. I mean, it could be great. I mean, the idea of an open-world game set in the Star Wars galaxy does kind of get me tingling in my tingly bits. But it's a Ubisoft open-world game. I mean, it has the potential to be another Ghost Recon Breakpoint. It doesn't even have to be that bad. If it's just another Division 2, it would still be another massive wasted opportunity. On the other hand, it has the potential to be another Far Cry 5 or Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So, yeah. You can appreciate, I hope, why I greeted the news that Ubisoft were doing a Star Wars game with more than a little degree of ambivalence. Potentially just about the only way the news could have been worse would have been if Bethesda had gotten the license. Oh, hang on a minute. They did! Yeah, what could possibly be worse than the news that the clown shoe-in-chief Todd Howard of Bethesda, the douche canoe responsible for It Just Works, Fallout 76, has gotten his hands on the Star Wars license. Well, he hasn't. But it's almost as bad. He's gotten his hands on the Indiana Jones license. So Bethesda have gotten their hands on the Indiana Jones license, and we haven't seen a good Indiana Jones game since Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis in 1992. A game with a story so good that it could easily, and in fact should have been, the plot of the fourth movie, instead of that Crystal Skull bullshit that George Lucas foisted on us. And now Bethesda have got the license. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. The thing is, it's easy to forget that Bethesda used to be very, very good at doing story and plot and character. You can blame Fallout 76 for that. But we should remember that Bethesda made their name on story and plot and character that was so good that people were prepared to overlook all of the bugs. It's only when they forgot to put the story, the plot and the character in that people had no alternative but to confront all of the bugs. Hello, Fallout 76. Yes, we are still kicking you when you're down. So the fact that, according to Lucasfilm Games Vice President Doug Riley, I think his name was, that Todd Howard came in with a story he believed in for the Indiana Jones game is encouraging. Because when Bethesda remember to put a story in, their games are usually pretty good. And they don't even have to put too much effort in where the characters are concerned, because they've got Indiana Jones already on a plate. I mean, most of the hard work's been done for them. So I'm cautiously optimistic about Bethesda's Indiana Jones game, and cautiously optimistic about Ubisoft's open-world Star Wars game, because when Ubisoft put the effort in, their open-world games are usually pretty good. The only real danger is that Ubisoft may decide to just not bother putting the effort in the same way that Electronic Arts didn't really bother to put the effort in the first 6 or 7 years they owned the Star Wars license, because it's a Star Wars license. Star Wars games tend to sell themselves, because they're Star Wars games. So Ubisoft could just toss out a Watch Dogs Legion with a Star Wars skin. The kind of game where you'll start playing and then suddenly find that you've spent hours absorbed just doing not quite the same thing over and over again, but more or less the same thing with just enough subtle variety to fool that part of your brain that thrives on variety into thinking that you are actually doing something different. But not different enough to make you want to play it again the next day, in the way that Ubisoft do. Related to that question from Pilot B, are there any games on the horizon that I'm looking forward to, is another game. No, it isn't. It's another one. It is, but it's another question from the one and only Weeb. Jingles, have you thought of trying out Fallout New Vegas: The Frontier? It's a fan-made mod for Fallout New Vegas that took almost 10 years to complete. It's pretty much a whole other game, and it's going hog wild with its story so far. It's probably going to be available for a long while, since Obsidian probably wouldn't pull a Nintendo and shove a cease and desist on it. But I'd highly recommend trying it out if you have the time. Okay. Thank you for bringing this one to my attention, by the way, because I'd never even heard about this mod for Fallout New Vegas, The Frontier. Fallout New Vegas itself was an incredibly good game, probably because it was developed by Obsidian and not Bethesda. They only published it. And the news that a 10-year in the making fan mod with a completely new story and location was ready to be played was something that got me pretty excited. So the one and only Weeb asked me this question on the Salt Mines Discord server not even a week ago. I think I saw it the same day, because I do check Discord at least once a day, and immediately went and Googled Fallout New Vegas, The Frontier. And I can't remember the specifics, but I'm pretty sure it had its own Steam page, although it wasn't quite ready for release. Although I think you could get a pre-release version of it on the Nexus Mods website. But the full version was due for release any day, so I didn't bother with the pre-release version. And if it was available on Steam, I added it to my Steam wishlist. Well, I then completely forgot about it, because I have a lot of stuff going on. But when I sat down today to do this episode of Mingles with Jingles, I went over the questions that had been posted in the Salt Mines Discord server, and I saw this question from the one and only Weeb, bringing Fallout New Vegas The Frontier to my attention. I thought, oh yes, I remember. I meant to investigate that. So I went to have a look. And it just seems to have gone. Certainly not on Steam anymore. And if you go to the Nexus Mods page, there's just a message saying this. Some deeply concerning news has emerged in the past few hours. We've been recently notified that one of our developers, Zoo the Skunk, had posted animated paedophilic content on their personal artist accounts. The items in question are deeply disturbing to the entire team, and we condemn them in the strongest sense. Zoo the Skunk has since been removed from the development team and banned off our community Discord. Blah de blah de blah, stop production work on the mod, blah de blah de blah, address current events properly, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, it turns out that one of the mod's developers has an unhealthy fascination with little boys and girls, and upon discovering this, the rest of the mod team have quite rightfully shit their pearly pink panties because this is a labour of love for them. You know, this is something that these guys have been doing in their free time for the last 10 years. They don't get paid for this, they don't charge anything for this mod, and they certainly can't afford to be sued because of anything that this one person has left in the game files that they don't know about. It wouldn't matter that they weren't responsible for it. It wouldn't matter that they weren't aware of it. That wouldn't stop them from being sued. So the mod has been pulled. It's no longer available for distribution from anywhere until the remaining mod developers have gone through the game files with a fine-tooth comb to ensure that there's nothing in there that shouldn't be. So, yeah, the one and only Weeb. No, I had not heard of Fallout New Vegas The Frontier. Yes, I was very much looking forward to giving it a go because I loved Fallout New Vegas, and if this promises to be more of the same, then I'm sure it's going to be excellent. Unfortunately, in light of the events that have sprung up surrounding this mod in the last couple of days, it doesn't look like I'm going to be getting my Fallout New Vegas The Frontier itch scratched anytime soon. Actually, that does remind me, while we're on the subject of mods for popular games, you may recall that quite a while back, as part of the Casual Saturday video series, I got quite into Plague Inc., the game where you get to basically be a virus, or a bacteria, or a neurophage, or a nanoplague, or whatever, and attempt to wipe out humanity. A game that, for many, has been hitting a little bit too close to the knuckle in the light of recent current events. Well, this week the developers released a completely free DLC for owners of the game, and it's called The Cure, where you kind of take the game scenario and flip it on its head, and instead of being the virus, you get to be in charge of the global effort to eradicate a pandemic that's sweeping the globe. I've had a go of it, and it's pretty good. And it's not quite as simple and straightforward as you might imagine. You'd think that just telling everybody to stay 2 meters apart, wear face masks and wash their hands would be fairly simple. But in the game, just as in real life, if Joe Public gets the impression that you, as the authorities, are coming across just a little bit too big brother for their tastes, Then they'll grab the hands of their neighbours in solidarity, whip off their face masks and yell, "But my freedoms!" into each other's faces. Which I'm sure you'll agree is probably not the best way to handle the kind of disease that's spread by people breathing on each other. So in this new DLC for Plague Inc., you have to kind of balance the necessity of getting shit done without treading too much on people's personal liberties. You can shut down countries' borders, but you have to also supply economic aid to those countries, otherwise everybody's going to basically revolt in mass demonstrations of non-compliance. So that's The Cure, a brand new, completely free DLC for Plague Inc. Available via Steam on PC, and I'm pretty sure it's also available as a mobile game on the Google Play Store or wherever the hell it is that you get your mobile games from. Captain the Defiant Pirate 21 wanted to know, Jingles, if you were a character on a Star Trek ship, which department would you want to be in? Well, clearly not the security department, although that answer's probably a bit obvious. But I mean, who would want to be a Star Trek red shirt? Actually, something that I've noticed, not just lately, but something that I've noticed for a long time in Star Trek, and not just the original series, but in particular the original series. I don't know when was the last time you watched an episode of the original series of Star Trek, but all those red shirts, those disposable security team members, have you ever noticed? They're all kind of old. Do you not think that's a bit weird? And not just because it's amazing that any of them lived as long as they did, given how quickly Starfleet seems to go through red shirts, but I've noticed that Star Trek seems to be the place where old actors go to die. No, wait, I mean it. I'm not making this up, and I'm not entirely joking either. Okay, the main characters tend to be reasonably young and good-looking, and if they're not young, they are good-looking. And if they're not good-looking, they're bloody good actors. And, you know, yes, Jean-Luc Picard. I'm mostly looking at you here. But I'm talking about the side characters. All of the characters played by actors who are in heavy costume or makeup. The ones that play all of the aliens, the Ferengi, the Klingons, the Cardassians, and so on and so on and so on. These are usually characters who are played by actors, usually very good actors, but you wouldn't believe how old these people are until you see them without all of the makeup and the costume on. 3 of my favourite characters in Star Trek ever, and they're all from my favourite series of Star Trek ever, Deep Space Nine. The Ferengi, Quark, played by Armin Shimmerman, who also played Principal Snyder in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The Cardassian, Gul Dukat, played by Mark Alimo, and the Cardassian Tailor, Garak, played by Andrew Robinson. Andrew Robinson was the bad guy in the original Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movie. That's how long he's been around. But the benefit of putting these people, and I've met 2 of them, by the way, Armin Shimmerman and Andrew Robinson are both lovely, lovely people. But the benefit of putting them underneath all of this makeup is you have no idea how old they really are. But what does their age have to do with anything, Jingles? Surely it's all about the performance. Well, you're absolutely right. But Armin Shimmerman's 71 years old. If it wasn't for the fact that you stick him under all of that Ferengi makeup, there's no way he would be cast as a 30-year-old Ferengi. It's the same with Mark Alimo, who plays Gul Dukat. Gul Dukat, when you see him in costume and makeup, is a very imposing, physical-looking, middle-aged, in the prime of his strength Cardassian. But the actor who plays him is 78. When Mark Alimo was born, America had only been in World War II for 6 months. If it wasn't for all of the makeup and the prosthetics, there's no way he could have possibly been cast to play a middle-aged character. So Star Trek is very definitely where old actors go to die. And I think that's great, because they are great actors. And the fact that they're playing characters that are unrecognisable allows them to continue acting and getting work when normally they would only ever be cast as somebody's grandfather, which is a massive waste of talent. I realise I haven't answered your question, although you probably shouldn't be surprised. What department would I like to be in? I don't know, what department has the easiest life? I don't think any of them do, really. Certainly not engineering. Certainly not the science department. I'm not smart enough to be in the science department. And I'm too forgetful to be in the engineering department. Oh god, I suppose that really only leaves the tactical department. I'm cursed to be a red shirt in Star Trek, whether I like it or not. And I'd be an old red shirt too, and they're always the first ones to die. Oh, I guess I'm pretty screwed. Chorusite wants to know, Jingles, when you uploaded your first video to YouTube, did you ever think you'd be where you are today? What, sitting in front of the same PC? Uploading videos to YouTube? Well, okay, it's not the same PC. I know what you mean. And no, of course I didn't. And it never ceases to amaze me that so many people still tune in regularly to listen to whatever I have to say. It's, you really shouldn't, because I don't know anything. I do encourage you. I don't always try to make a point of this. I should make a point of it more often. Regardless of what I say on any given subject, do try to make your own mind up. Don't just listen to me. I mean, you know, by all means do listen to me, but don't just listen to me. If I offer one opinion or viewpoint on a subject, then try to find conflicting opinions on that subject. And then, once you've exposed yourself to as much information as possible, make your own mind up. Because if you have one particular way of looking at something, one particular opinion on something, it's very comforting to surround yourself with the opinions of other people who think the same thing. But all you're doing is living in an echo chamber. You're never going to evolve your ideas that way. You should actively go out and listen to the opinions of people that you don't agree with. I'm not saying you should agree with them. You might, but you should at least listen to them to get an alternative perspective, because it's possible that somebody who doesn't share your opinion is going to have a different perspective. Not necessarily one that you're ever going to agree with, but listening to that perspective might just cause you to reevaluate how you look upon the subject under discussion, and perhaps lead to you coming to a greater understanding of whatever the hell it was that the two of you were arguing about in the first place. You see, if you don't have your opinions challenged, you'll never change them. They might not need changing, but if you never have your opinions challenged, if you never put yourself into a position where you're forced to examine and defend your opinions, those opinions and views are never going to be tested. You're never going to know whether they stand up to new information or not. And if you just surround yourself with other people who share that same opinion, if all you do is seek out content made by people who agree with you anyway, you're just living in an echo chamber. You're never going to have your opinions or views challenged. And some of us definitely need our opinions and views challenged. So I am very, very grateful, of course, that so many of you do turn up to listen to what it is that I have to say, but don't let me be your only source of information. In fact, I do encourage you to go out and expose yourself to people who disagree with the things that I have to say. And then make your own damn mind up. Right now, Akazuki is of the opinion that she needs some treats. I do not agree with her opinion, but she is presenting a fairly forceful argument, so I am prepared to revise my judgment. So on that note, I need to end this episode of Mingles with Jingles and go and pamper my cat. I very nearly said pamper my pussy. But I know just exactly where that line of thought is going to lead us, so stop it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Mingles with Jingles. Thanks once again to everybody who supports me on Patreon, everybody who subscribes on Floatplane. It's mostly due to you Patreon supporters and Floatplane subscribers that I'm able to keep doing this in the manner to which I have become accustomed. So thank you once again. But even if you don't, even if you're just here for the lols, it doesn't really matter. Thanks at least for watching all the way to the end. The view time certainly helps. And I hope you've enjoyed it, because that's it for today. As always, folks, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.